Hi everyone, and welcome to this recorded lecture that's really going to look at some broad strokes about the purpose and planning of a group session. So it's really important for the purpose of the group to be clear. It really will establish the ways in which you facilitate the group process. And in fact, when I'm working with my own supervisees around, why did group go south for them or why did it not end up as they wanted it to, it usually comes down to that the purpose of the group wasn't fully developed, and that led to some confusion. So as we can see here, the first real idea is that, without a clear purpose, the group can be confusing. Is this a psychoeducational group? Is this a process group? A task group? All of those different types of group will need different styles, potentially of need different styles of leadership. For a process group, the leader is often taking less of an active and directive role, whereas in a psychoeducational or task group, the leader needs to be very active and directive, or the information might not be communicated, or the task might not be completed. Probably the biggest sort of area or experience that you can have when a group the purpose isn't real clear is that it's boring. I'll often have clients tell me that, the group was just busy work, or they hate worksheets, or, they just, it's clear that there was a mismatch between the counselor's intention and where the clients are in that moment. And that can make, all of that can be confusing, but if the purpose isn't clear, all of that is extra confusing. So we really want to be very clear from the beginning. What are our goals and what are we looking to achieve through this group process? We really want to take a look at who we're going to include within the group setting. Not all individuals are appropriate for group. Not all topics might be appropriate for group. If somebody becomes really activated because of past or current trauma, it might not be appropriate for them to come into a group setting to discuss their trauma. That might be an example of where there might need to be some individual sessions before somebody comes into, maybe like a self-help group for trauma, something like that. And the beginning of group is really just about getting everybody comfortable with the experience. We can all kind of reflect on different groups that we've been a part of, and I encourage you to, and think about how the leader of the group helped you to feel comfortable. Most people come to group feeling very anxious. And part of defining the purpose of a group is how often it's going to meet. I've been seeing a lot recently with COVID and everything going on of what might be called single session group experiences. So people offering single group experiences, psychoeducational experiences around self-care, self-compassion, resiliency. Here the author is talking about a nutrition group. GPACA is the Greater Philadelphia Area Counseling Association will be offering a workshop coming up June 13th, where I'll be talking about licensure and job readiness. And really what's most important for a single session group is that you're very aware of your time, because you might not have that much time, and counselors are notorious for putting a little bit too much content into too short of a time. And we really want to be consistently evaluating our group experience. I am casually offering group members to give me feedback as the group is going on, and definitely before, in the middle, and after a group experience, I am formally evaluating, usually with some type of survey about how their experience is going. If I have the opportunity to have a closed group, so one where new members are not going to enter at any time, it's the same 10 people for, let's say, 8 weeks, I often ask them to keep a journal And the journals might also become a form of evaluation for the group if the group members are willing to share with you. One thing that we know is that you absolutely need further training in group experience, particularly with certain population and context. This course is to provide a foundation for you. And, after you graduate, I hope you all seek licensure, and that will mean more supervision. And I encourage you to look for quality supervision as part of your job search, something that we can talk more about as a group. So where do we start? Well, we start with a little bit of pre-group planning. How many sessions will we meet? When are we going to get together? Who should the members be? And you really want to think about this very carefully. Another topic we're talking about this week is ethics. And again, for example, you might not want to put in a group someone who has enacted domestic violence with someone who's a trauma survivor of domestic violence, right? We really want to think through who we're putting together here and how we can come to the most positive outcome. And there's a lot of different ways to screen members to see if they're appropriate for group. I almost always do a little personal interview. I'm definitely gathering sort of like an informal, short version of a biopsychosocial in my private practice. You might do a more formal version of this within a community counseling setting. And we really want to, and usually have to advocate that screening is essential because especially in corporatized medical settings, they might just want to put somebody in your group because it will give them more money. But we kind of have to advocate that that's not going to be safe for the other group members. So really being intentional about who we invite into our groups. And this really means thinking sort of broadly about what the group experience will be. What kind of topics do you want to cover during the experience? And really, when I'm thinking about a group, I'm thinking usually in terms of a theme, a larger group theme. So, for example, self-care. And then each week I might have something related to self-care that we're going to explore together. And then depending on the population, I'll sort of decide if I need to be more active and directive or be more in the role of facilitator and helping people to process. You do also want to plan for when members are going to be absent. And just like with any good counseling experience where the group members are responsible to each other, we will also be responsible to each other and want to make sure that if we're going to be absent or something is going on within the group that we let our group members know. And we start thinking much more in terms of the collective rather than the individual, we versus me. There are three broad phases of group. The beginning of group when we're warming up and getting to know each other, the middle or working phase, and the closing phase. And before I get a group started, I'm really thinking about all three phases. What does somebody need to feel comfortable in the beginning? How can I deepen the focus of our work as we're getting into the working phase? And what can we take from our group experience together out into the real world so that this group therapy experience is impactful beyond just the moment? I also want to add that in terms of group stages, I encourage you to do a little Googling on YouTube for group stages of counseling because there's actually several models of, uh, of group stages and different authors use different stage names. But in general, you're always going to have a warm-up phase, and this is usually where we're doing an icebreaker or a check-in. One of my favorite check-ins to do is just a scaling question. On a scale of 1 to 10, where are you today? And that also will allow for everybody to give feedback. And if you have anybody that's a real talker in the group, it can kind of cut them off at the beginning so that you can get a full picture of where everyone is before you get into any of the in-depth detail that you might need to cover in the group experience. We definitely want to make sure that we are aware of what it's like to be a new member of a group. This is particularly important for open groups, meaning where a new member could join at any day, any moment. This is very common in community mental health. And one of the ways that I do this, one aspect of this experience for me is that I always review the group rules or norms at the beginning of each group. And then that way we know that there are a group of shared values and assumptions, and no one has to guess at what they are. And at the beginning of group, it might take a little bit of energy on your part to kind of get people motivated, particularly for these groups that are after work, like our own, where more energy might be more diminished. So to get into the planning phase, usually, to be honest, there's a little bit of conflict that leads to the planning phase. This is in some other models called storming before you norm. And here in this phase is where people are really kind of doing the work, is what we call. And when we're in this phase and groups are working well, even if it's an active and directive group in terms of my own leadership, if the group is running well, you usually can step back and it will run itself. That's one of the key pieces I can identify of a strong group experience. But this is when we're really working on whatever is the main focus of the group experience. And you always want to think about the closing really from the very beginning, right? So how do you want to close with your clients? One of my favorite activities to do is to have people write letters to future clients or future supervisees and tell them how they can get the most out of the counseling group or the supervision group. And I like to highlight or summarize some of the main points of the group. And we also look at, what are our growing edges? This was one group experience. Where else can we continue to grow? People are often very untrusting of the ending of anything, really. And so you'll often see this in relationships where, people might, a couple might break up and initially it might be okay, and then they usually get in a fight, and then there's a quiet period. And that's because it's always easier for people to leave relationships when they're angry. And most people's experience with closure, at least those that we often come in contact with as counselors, is not always, therapeutic or positive. And so it's just a reminder that we can provide for our clients maybe one of the first closures that they've had that could be personal, that can help them to grow and be positive. And so we, in a good closure exercise, we're hearing from the members about their overall experience. We're learning about what behavior changes they're likely to take from the group and want to continue to commit to. The leader often gives feedback to members, and it's really good when feedback can be between members. The more that there is an interconnection of communication between members, the better. Timing is so important. I think this is sort of where counselors sometimes get hung up because we can have a real intuitive sense of how things are going, and things can, you want to have different amounts of time for different sections of the group, and so it's easy to spend too much time, and I'm really guilty of this sometimes with the check-in, and not continue to get deeper in terms of our focus within the group. Some of the content that might be shared in the group might be interesting, and then you might lose focus of the goal. And so I have something that looks like this for every group that I run. Actually, to be honest, usually 2 or 3 of these so that I have a backup plan if things don't go as planned, or anytime that I have the opportunity to offer choices to group members in terms of how the group is facilitated, the better. That's a form of empowerment for them. But this is the overall structure. We're starting with introductions, why they came, maybe a check-in. The leader is providing an overall detailed, over analysis of how the group is run and its purpose, what might come up for different people in terms of fears or needs. And again, I always begin a group with reviewing rules of confidentiality, attendance, and that we know that people are coming to the group experience with best intentions, and that we seek to, especially as future group leaders and as leaders, that we seek to communicate in a way that provides healing and connection, and a sense of belonging. Sentence completions are great ways to get people started. There's a whole bunch of these that you can find online. And you can have members share out their answers with each other. Sometimes I have group members pair and share with each other and then share out the themes. That's one way to create more intimacy among group members. And the point of, I think one of the things about group that can sort of get old is just staying within the open group and not allowing for dyads in the group. And it's good to have exercises where you can add dyads within a group experience, so breaking down into 2 or 3s, because this will allow group members to develop a deeper sense of intimacy, and they'll bring that intimacy back to the larger group. But essentially, you start with an opener. You have sort of the meat of what you're doing. Then the group might discuss out, and then you'll do some closure. These are different examples of what that might look like. Really, the biggest problem that you might have is that not having enough time to necessarily plan for a group. And so this is why I encourage you to start building your therapist library. You can see on Amazon and just online, there's tons of group ideas and activities. Some better quality than others for sure. And in the beginning, I just had, probably about 150 different worksheets and exercises that I could pull from at any time. And then that way, if the group, wanted to do a process group that wasn't necessarily theme directed, we could certainly do that. But if energy was low and I needed to be a little bit more active and directive, I had things planned. And this I really want to encourage for you. So what can happen is that you can, I think as a new clinician, especially, I had this happen to me all the time, was that I was really anxious. And so I would have too many exercises, or I would be too, inflexible about leaving an exercise behind if people weren't really feeling it that day, because I wasn't sure I could hold the space. And I encourage you to sort of work with your own anxiety around this if that's also true for you, because that's really where people start to withdraw from the group experience. What I've really come to learn at the end of the day is that if people have good relational experiences in a group, sort of the task is less important. It's the connections that really help people to grow. And the mistakes really come around not either over planning or under planning, and it takes some time to figure out what is the best, what the best balance of that is for you. Vague plans, again, you can see lack of flexibility. So you're going to have a plan. I think we've sort of emphasized that at this point. Have a backup plan. Be flexible. And just be. I think I want to end with what stick with being flexible, because that is a key personal disposition for counselors.